In 1821, on the remote island of St. Helena, Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who once made Europe tremble, breathed his last in solitude and agony. During his final days, he constantly complained of severe abdominal pain, relentless vomiting, and a sensation of needles piercing his body. Many historians suspect that this great emperor did not die of illness, but was poisoned by someone using arsenic. Ironically, the man who once commanded Europe's most powerful army may have been brought down by a small amount of invisible white powder in his meal. Napoleon's story is just one of countless power tragedies that have unfolded throughout the length of human history, from ancient Egyptian pharaohs to Roman emperors, from medieval European monarchs to Asian royalty. The fear of assassination by poison has haunted those who held supreme power. Statistics show that at least half of Roman emperors died from assassination, and among them, most were poisoned. It was this very fear that gave birth to a unique and dangerous profession in history, the poison tester, also known as the food taster. These were not merely ordinary servants, but professionally trained specialists, ready to sacrifice their lives to protect their masters. They were silent warriors on the most invisible front of the power struggle. The profession of poison testing was not simply about tasting food before royalty consumed it. It was an entire complex system including controlling food sources, supervising preparation processes, developing methods for detecting toxins, and even studying the psychology of would-be assassins. Poison testers had to have deep knowledge of herbalism, basic chemistry, and medicine to recognize dangerous signs. Today we will explore the mysterious world of these guardian angels. From the history of formation and development of the profession, the extraordinary people who sacrifice for duty, to the sophisticated poison detection methods they developed over millennia. This is not just a story about power and conspiracy, but about loyalty, sacrifice, and human intelligence in the struggle for survival. The practice of employing food tasters to protect royalty from poisoning stretches back to the very dawn of organized civilization, emerging wherever power concentrated in the hands of a few, and the stakes of political competition grew deadly serious. To understand the evolution of this unique profession, we must journey through millennia of human history, examining how the constant threat of assassination by poison shaped the lives of rulers and gave birth to one of history's most dangerous occupations. In ancient Egypt, the pharaohs, considered living gods by their subjects, faced the paradox that their divine status made them both revered and targeted. The earliest recorded instances of systematic food testing date back to the reign of Pharaoh Amenhotep III around 1400 BCE. Egyptian court documents describe elaborate rituals where designated servants would consume portions of the pharaoh's meals hours before the royal dining commenced. These early tasters, known as kentisha, meaning those who go before, were selected from families with generations of loyal service to the crown. The Egyptian approach to poison detection was remarkably sophisticated for its time. Court physicians developed detailed knowledge of local toxic plants and minerals, creating the world's first poison identification manuals written on papyrus scrolls. These documents, some of which survive today, describe symptoms of various toxins with startling accuracy. The Egyptians understood that many poisons had delayed effects, so their tasters would often wait several hours after consuming food before the pharaoh would eat. They also employed animals, particularly cats and dogs, as additional safety measures, observing that these creatures showed symptoms more quickly than humans. However, it was in ancient Rome that the profession of food tasting truly came into its own as a sophisticated science. The Romans called their food tasters pregustatores, literally meaning those who taste before. The role became formalized during the reign of Augustus Caesar, who established the first official corps of imperial food tasters after several assassination attempts on his life. The Roman system was remarkable in its complexity and thoroughness, reflecting both the paranoia of absolute power and the genuine sophistication of Roman administrative systems. Roman pregustatores were not merely servants but highly trained professionals who underwent years of preparation. They studied under court physicians to learn the properties of various poisons, practiced identifying subtle changes in taste and smell that might indicate contamination, and developed almost supernatural abilities to detect even minute amounts of toxic substances. The most skilled tasters could allegedly identify over 200 different poisons by taste alone, a claim that, while perhaps exaggerated, speaks to the level of expertise these individuals achieved. The Roman approach to food safety extended far beyond simple tasting. They implemented what we might recognize today as a comprehensive food security system. Every ingredient that entered the imperial kitchens was traced back to its source, with detailed records kept of suppliers, transport routes, and storage conditions. Kitchen staff were subject to rigorous background checks, and many were slaves whose families were held as additional insurance of their loyalty. The actual cooking process was supervised by multiple officials, and finished dishes were sealed and marked to ensure no tampering occurred between preparation and service. Roman historical records provide us with fascinating glimpses into the daily lives of these food tasters. Pliny the Elder writes about a taster named Marcus Flavius, who served Emperor Claudius for over 20 years, developing such expertise that he could detect the presence of aconitine, a deadly plant poison, even when it was present in quantities so small as to be virtually tasteless. Flavius reportedly saved Claudius from at least 6 serious poisoning attempts during his tenure. Though ironically, Claudius ultimately died from mushroom poisoning administered by his wife Agrippina in a plot that somehow bypassed the entire security system. The complexity of Roman court intrigue meant that poisoning attempts came from multiple directions. Sometimes the threat came from external enemies seeking to destabilize the empire, but more often it originated from within the imperial family itself, as relatives schemed for succession. This internal threat made the job of food tasters particularly challenging, as they had to be wary not just of obvious enemies, but of anyone with access to the imperial kitchens, including other trusted servants and even family members. The fall of Rome did not end the tradition of royal food tasters. Instead, it spread throughout the emerging kingdoms of medieval Europe. As feudalism developed and royal courts became centers of political intrigue, the need for protection against poisoning became even more acute. Medieval European rulers faced threats not only from rival nobles, but from the growing power of the Catholic Church, emerging merchant classes, and foreign invaders, each of whom might resort to poison as a weapon of choice. During the medieval period, the role of food taster became hereditary in many courts, with entire families dedicating themselves to this dangerous profession across generations. The de Montfort family, for instance, served as chief food tasters to the English crown for over 3 centuries, beginning in the reign of Henry III and continuing through the Wars of the Roses. Family traditions developed around the profession, with fathers passing down secret techniques to their sons, creating an almost mystical oral tradition of poison detection. Medieval food tasters developed particularly sophisticated techniques for dealing with the era's most common poisons. Arsenic, easily obtainable and virtually tasteless, was the poison of choice for medieval assassins. Tasters learned to detect its presence through subtle metallic aftertastes and by observing their own physical reactions in the minutes following consumption. They also developed the practice of using silver utensils and cups, believing correctly that silver would tarnish when exposed to certain types of poison, providing an early warning system. The medieval period also saw the development of more elaborate testing rituals. In many courts, food tasting became a ceremonial affair involving multiple people and complex procedures. At the court of Charlemagne, for example, every dish served to the emperor was tasted by 3 different people, first by the cook who prepared it, then by a designated taster, and finally by a court official. Each taster had to wait a prescribed amount of time before the next person in the chain could proceed, ensuring that any delayed action poisons would be detected before reaching the emperor. Religious considerations also influenced medieval food tasting practices. Many rulers insisted that their food tasters be Christians, believing that their fear of divine judgment would ensure their loyalty. Some courts employed priests as food tasters, reasoning that their religious vows made them more trustworthy than secular servants. This religious dimension added another layer of complexity to an already dangerous profession, as tasters had to navigate not only the physical risks of their job, but also the spiritual implications of their role in protecting earthly power. The Renaissance period brought both new challenges and new opportunities for food tasters. The revival of classical learning meant that educated assassins had access to ancient texts describing sophisticated poisoning techniques, while the growth of international trade brought exotic new toxins from distant lands. At the same time, the Renaissance emphasis on empirical observation and scientific method led to significant advances in poison detection techniques. Italian Renaissance courts, notorious for their political intrigue and family vendettas, produced some of history's most famous food tasters. The Medici family in Florence employed an entire department of food security specialists, including not only tasters, but also chemists, physicians, and even early forensic investigators who could analyze suspicious deaths for signs of poisoning. The sophistication of these operations reflected both the extreme dangers faced by Renaissance rulers and the advanced state of Italian scientific knowledge. The Borgia family, particularly Pope Alexander VI and his son Cesare Borgia, became legendary for both their use of poison against enemies and their elaborate precautions against being poisoned themselves. Their food tasters were reportedly trained in the use of various antidotes and carried vials of supposed universal antidotes wherever they went. While many of these antidotes were probably ineffective, the psychological effect of believing in protection may have helped tasters perform their duties more effectively. As European powers expanded their reach through exploration and colonization, food tasters had to adapt to new challenges. Colonial governors and trading company officials in distant lands faced unique poisoning threats from local plants and animals unknown in Europe. This led to the development of specialized training programs for tasters assigned to overseas postings, involving study of local flora and fauna and collaboration with indigenous knowledge holders who understood regional toxins. The establishment of permanent diplomatic missions between European powers also created new categories of food tasters. Ambassadors and their staffs, operating in foreign courts where they had numerous enemies and few friends, required protection from poisoning attempts. Diplomatic food tasters had to be particularly skilled, as they needed to navigate not only the physical dangers of their profession, but also the complex etiquette of foreign courts where their presence might be seen as an insult to their hosts. In the Far East, particularly in China, the tradition of royal food tasting developed along somewhat different lines, but with equal sophistication. Chinese emperors claiming the mandate of heaven faced unique challenges in protecting themselves from poisoning attempts. The vastness of the Chinese empire and the complexity of court bureaucracy meant that potential assassins might come from any level of the imperial hierarchy, requiring extraordinarily comprehensive security measures. Chinese food tasters, known as shi duje, or poison testers, underwent training that combined practical skills with philosophical and medical education. Traditional Chinese medicine's emphasis on the balance of different elements and energies in food meant that Chinese tasters developed particularly subtle abilities to detect when something was wrong with a dish, even if they could not identify the specific problem. This holistic approach to food safety proved remarkably effective, as Chinese historical records show relatively few successful poisoning attempts against emperors compared to their European counterparts. The Chinese also developed the most elaborate mechanical devices for poison detection. Silver chopsticks that would change color in the presence of certain toxins became standard equipment in the imperial dining rooms. More sophisticated devices included jade cups that supposedly cracked when poison liquid was poured into them, and golden spoons that would tarnish instantly upon contact with various toxic substances. While the scientific basis for some of these beliefs was questionable, the psychological deterrent effect was considerable. Japanese royal food tasting traditions developed under the influence of both Chinese practices and indigenous Shinto beliefs about purity and contamination. Japanese food tasters, called dokumi, were often selected from samurai families, reflecting the belief that only those with the warrior code of Bushido could be trusted with such an important responsibility. The Japanese emphasis on ritual purity meant that food tasting ceremonies became elaborate affairs, involving purification rituals and formal protocols that could take hours to complete. The isolation of Japan during the Edo period created unique challenges for food tasters, as they had to become experts not only in traditional poisons, but also in detecting any foreign substances that might be introduced by the rare Dutch and Chinese traders allowed to operate in Japanese ports. This led to the development of highly specialized testing techniques designed to detect even minute traces of unfamiliar chemicals or biological agents. Throughout all these different cultural contexts, certain common themes emerge in the history of royal food tasting. First, the profession consistently attracted individuals of exceptional courage and loyalty, as the job requirements naturally selected for people willing to risk their lives for their rulers. Second, the technical aspects of poison detection drove genuine scientific advances, as courts invested significant resources in developing better methods for identifying toxic substances. Third, the social status of food tasters varied widely, but generally reflected their importance to royal security. In some courts, they were highly honored positions, while in others they were seen as expendable servants. The psychological toll of the profession was enormous across all cultures. Food tasters lived with the constant knowledge that any meal might be their last, and this stress manifested in various ways. Some became deeply religious, seeking spiritual comfort in the face of daily danger. Others developed elaborate personal rituals and superstitions designed to ward off harm. Many suffered from what we would now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder, displaying symptoms of hypervigilance, insomnia, and social withdrawal. Perhaps most remarkably, despite the obvious dangers and psychological challenges, the profession of royal food tasting maintained high standards and attracted dedicated practitioners for over 2 millennia. This speaks to something fundamental about human nature: the willingness of some individuals to sacrifice everything, including their lives, in service to ideals larger than themselves, whether those ideals were loyalty to a particular ruler, devotion to the stability of the state, or simply the honor of their family name. The professional food taster represented one of history's most specialized and dangerous occupations, requiring a unique combination of physical courage, technical expertise, and unwavering loyalty that few professions could match. These individuals were far more than mere servants. They were highly trained specialists whose skills could mean the difference between life and death for the most powerful people in their respective societies. To understand the true nature of this profession, we must examine in detail the daily responsibilities, selection processes, training methods, and personal experiences of these remarkable individuals. The daily routine of a professional food taster began before dawn and continued until the royal household had finished its final meal of the day. The taster's responsibilities extended far beyond the actual act of sampling food, encompassing a comprehensive security operation that monitored every aspect of the royal dining experience. Each morning, tasters would begin by inspecting the kitchens, checking for signs of unauthorized entry or tampering with cooking implements. They examined storage areas for evidence of contamination, tested water sources for purity, and verified that all ingredients matched the previous day's inventory. The actual process of food preparation required constant vigilance from the taster. They observed every step of cooking, from the initial washing of vegetables to the final plating of dishes. During cooking, tasters would sample ingredients at various stages, not just to check for poison, but to ensure that the taste profile remained consistent with expectations. An experienced taster could detect minute changes in flavor that might indicate the presence of toxic substances, even when those substances were present in quantities too small to cause immediate harm. The formal tasting ceremony typically occurred 30 to 60 minutes before the royal meal was scheduled to begin. This waiting period was crucial, as many poisons required time to take effect, and tasters needed to experience any symptoms before their masters consumed the same food. During this waiting period, tasters remained under observation by court physicians who monitored their pulse, breathing, skin color, and overall demeanor for any signs of distress. The taster would also perform various physical tests, such as walking in straight lines, reciting memorized passages, and demonstrating manual dexterity to ensure that their nervous system remained unaffected. The sophistication of tasting procedures varied considerably between different courts and historical periods, but the most advanced systems involved multiple layers of security. In the Chinese imperial court during the Ming dynasty, for example, food tasting involved a minimum of 5 different people: the head cook who prepared the dish, a kitchen taster who sampled it during preparation, a formal taster who consumed larger portions in the testing chamber, a backup taster who repeated the process with different portions of the same dish, and finally a ceremonial taster who performed the final check immediately before the emperor's meal. Each of these tasters had specific roles and specialized training. Kitchen tasters focused on detecting contamination introduced during the cooking process, and were particularly skilled at identifying the bitter or metallic tastes associated with many common poisons. Formal tasters underwent the most comprehensive training and were responsible for the final safety determination. Backup tasters served as a security redundancy, ensuring that if one taster somehow missed a poison or was compromised, another would catch the problem. Ceremonial tasters often held high court positions, and their participation was as much about political theater as genuine security, demonstrating the ruler's power and the loyalty of his servants. The selection process for becoming a food taster was extraordinarily rigorous and varied significantly based on the specific requirements of different royal courts. Most systems began with basic eligibility requirements that eliminated the vast majority of potential candidates. Candidates had to demonstrate perfect health with no history of serious illness, injury, or physical disability that might affect their ability to detect poisons or survive exposure to toxic substances. They needed exceptional sensory capabilities, particularly highly developed senses of taste and smell that could detect subtle changes in food that might indicate contamination. Beyond physical requirements, potential tasters underwent extensive background investigations that examined not only their own history, but that of their entire extended family. Courts needed absolute confidence in the loyalty of their tasters, as a compromised taster could easily become an instrument of assassination rather than protection. Investigators looked for any evidence of connections to enemy factions, financial difficulties that might make an individual susceptible to bribery, or personal grievances that might motivate betrayal. The psychological evaluation of potential tasters was equally thorough. Candidates underwent lengthy interviews designed to assess their emotional stability, courage under pressure, and capacity for maintaining secrets. Many courts employed what would now be recognized as sophisticated psychological testing, presenting candidates with hypothetical scenarios to gauge their reactions and decision-making processes. The ability to remain calm and clear thinking in dangerous situations was essential, as panic or poor judgment during a poisoning incident could prove fatal not only to the taster, but to their royal master. Once selected, new tasters entered training programs that could last anywhere from 6 months to several years, depending on the complexity of their future responsibilities. The training curriculum was remarkably comprehensive, covering areas that would not seem out of place in a modern medical or forensic science program. Trainees studied anatomy and physiology to understand how different poisons affected the human body, learned to recognize the symptoms of various types of poisoning, and practiced techniques for inducing vomiting or otherwise purging toxic substances from their systems. Botanical studies formed a crucial component of taster training, as many of the most dangerous poisons came from plants that might be deliberately cultivated for assassination purposes or accidentally introduced into food supplies through contaminated ingredients. Trainees learned to identify hundreds of different plants by sight, smell, and taste, memorizing not only their toxic properties but also the specific symptoms they produced and the time frames in which those symptoms would appear. Advanced trainees studied the seasonal variations in plant toxicity, geographical distribution of poisonous species, and methods for concentrating or purifying plant-based toxins. Chemistry training, while limited by the scientific knowledge available in different historical periods, nonetheless provided tasters with practical skills for detecting and neutralizing various types of poison. Medieval tasters learned to use chemical indicators such as silver objects that would tarnish in the presence of sulfur-based compounds, while Renaissance-era tasters studied the early chemical tests that could identify metallic poisons, such as arsenic or mercury. By the 18th century, taster training included instruction in using primitive chemical analysis equipment, such as distillation apparatus and early spectroscopic devices. Medical training focused heavily on practical emergency response skills. Tasters learned to recognize the early symptoms of poisoning in themselves and others, practiced administering various antidotes and purging agents, and studied techniques for maintaining consciousness and motor function, even while experiencing the effects of sublethal poison doses. Some training programs included controlled exposure to small amounts of various toxins, allowing trainees to experience firsthand the sensations associated with different types of poisoning and develop tolerance to substances they might encounter repeatedly in their professional duties. The social and professional lives of food tasters reflected the unique nature of their occupation. In most court systems, tasters occupied a peculiar position in the social hierarchy, holding considerable responsibility and trust while remaining technically servants. Their intimate knowledge of court secrets and close proximity to royal persons meant that they often wielded informal influence far beyond their official status, yet their origins as servants or minor nobility limited their formal recognition and advancement opportunities. Living conditions for food tasters varied widely, but generally reflected their importance to royal security. Most courts provided tasters with comfortable accommodations, nutritious meals, and medical care superior to that available to ordinary servants. However, these benefits came with significant restrictions on personal freedom. Tasters typically lived within the royal compound or in closely supervised housing nearby, limiting their ability to maintain normal social relationships or pursue independent interests. Many courts prohibited tasters from marrying or having children, viewing family attachments as potential security vulnerabilities that enemies might exploit. The financial compensation for food tasters was generally substantial, reflecting both the dangers of the profession and the need to ensure their loyalty through material incentives. Experienced tasters often earned more than skilled craftsmen or minor officials, and many courts provided additional benefits, such as pensions for disabled tasters or support for the families of those who died in service. Some tasters accumulated considerable wealth over their careers, though their restricted social status often limited their ability to enjoy their earnings or invest them in ways that might provide long-term security. The psychological challenges faced by professional food tasters were perhaps more significant than the physical dangers. Living with the constant possibility of sudden death created enormous stress that manifested in various ways. Many tasters developed elaborate personal rituals designed to provide psychological comfort and sense of control over their dangerous environment. Some became deeply religious, viewing their role as a form of martyrdom or divine service. Others adopted philosophical approaches that emphasized acceptance of fate and the temporary nature of all earthly existence. Social isolation was another major psychological burden. The secretive nature of their work and the restrictions on their personal relationships meant that many tasters lived lives of considerable loneliness. They could not discuss their work with outsiders, limiting their ability to form meaningful connections with people outside the court system. Even within the court, their unique role often set them apart from other servants and officials, creating a sense of separation that could be emotionally difficult to bear. Despite these challenges, many food tasters developed strong professional pride and sense of mission that sustained them through the difficulties of their occupation. They viewed themselves as guardians of political stability and social order, understanding that the assassination of their royal masters could trigger chaos, civil war, and suffering for countless innocent people. This sense of larger purpose helped many tasters find meaning in their dangerous work and maintain their dedication even when facing obvious personal risks. The career progression for food tasters typically followed predictable patterns, though individual experiences varied considerably. New tasters generally began in subordinate roles, assisting experienced practitioners and learning through observation and gradual assumption of responsibility. As they gained experience and demonstrated competence, they might be assigned to taste for less important royal family members or given responsibility for specific aspects of food security, such as kitchen supervision or ingredient inspection. Senior tasters often became supervisors of entire food security operations, managing teams of junior tasters and coordinating with other court officials responsible for royal safety. Some achieved positions of considerable authority, serving as advisors to rulers on matters related to security and court protocol. A few exceptional individuals transcended their servant origins entirely, receiving noble titles or other forms of recognition that elevated them to positions of genuine social prominence. The end of a food taster's career could come in several ways. Some retired after long service, often receiving pensions and honors that recognized their dedication and survival of numerous dangers. Others died in service, either from poison exposure or from other causes related to the stresses of their profession. A few were dismissed for incompetence or suspected disloyalty, though such dismissals were relatively rare given the careful selection processes employed by most courts. Retirement from food tasting was often difficult, as former tasters struggled to adapt to civilian life after years of living under extreme conditions. Many suffered from what would now be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, to experiencing anxiety, depression, and difficulty forming normal social relationships. Some former tasters found employment in related fields such as medicine or security consulting, using their specialized knowledge in new contexts. Others withdrew from public life entirely, living quietly on their pensions and avoiding any connection to their former profession. The legacy of individual food tasters varied considerably, but many left behind valuable contributions to the development of toxicology, forensic science, and security procedures. Their practical knowledge accumulated through years of dangerous experience provided the foundation for more scientific approaches to poison detection and prevention. Some tasters wrote memoirs or technical manuals that preserved their expertise for future generations, while others trained successors who carried on their methods and techniques. Perhaps most importantly, the professional food tasters of history demonstrated the capacity of human beings to find meaning and purpose even in extraordinarily dangerous and difficult circumstances. Their willingness to risk their lives daily for the protection of others represents a form of heroism that deserves recognition alongside more celebrated forms of courage and sacrifice. Their stories remind us that throughout history, the stability and continuity of human societies has often depended on the quiet dedication of individuals whose names are forgotten, but whose contributions were essential to the survival of the communities they served. Part 4. Ancient Methods of Poison Detection. The art of detecting poisons in ancient times was a delicate balance between primitive science, keen observation, and desperate innovation. As the stakes grew higher and the methods of assassination became more sophisticated, those tasked with protecting royalty had to develop increasingly clever ways to identify deadly substances before they could claim their intended victims. Biological detection methods. The earliest and most straightforward approach to poison detection involved the use of living creatures as biological sensors. Dogs were among the first animals employed for this purpose, their loyalty and acute senses making them ideal candidates for this dangerous duty. Court records from medieval Europe describe hunting hounds being fed portions of the king's meal hours before the royal feast, their handlers watching carefully for any signs of distress or unusual behavior. The practice wasn't limited to canines. White mice, with their rapid metabolisms and quick reaction times to toxins, became standard equipment in many royal kitchens. These small creatures would be fed tiny portions of each dish, their cage placed where kitchen staff could easily observe any changes in behavior. The sight of a mouse writhing in agony or falling still was enough to condemn an entire meal to the flames. Birds, particularly canaries and other songbirds, served a dual purpose in poison detection. Their delicate respiratory systems made them extremely sensitive to airborne toxins and gases, while their beautiful songs would cease abruptly if they encountered something harmful. Palace chambers often housed these feathered sentinels, their sudden silence serving as an early warning system for environmental dangers. Perhaps most intriguingly, some courts employed snakes as living poison detectors. Certain species of serpents possess remarkable sensitivity to specific plant alkaloids and chemical compounds. Court documents from ancient China describe elaborate ceremonies where various snake species would be presented with samples of the emperor's food and drink. The serpent's reactions, from agitation to lethargy, were carefully interpreted by skilled handlers who had spent years learning to read these subtle biological signals. The human element in biological detection was equally sophisticated. Professional tasters developed an almost supernatural ability to read their own body's responses to potential threats. They learned to distinguish between the normal variations in heart rate, blood pressure, and neural response that came with anxiety, and the specific physiological changes that indicated exposure to toxic substances. Experienced tasters could detect the subtle numbness that preceded paralytic poisoning, the slight visual disturbances that signaled the presence of certain plant toxins, or the peculiar metallic taste that often accompanied heavy metal contamination. Their training involved deliberately exposing themselves to minute quantities of known poisons, building both tolerance and recognition patterns that could mean the difference between life and death for their royal charges. The observation of physiological responses became an art form in itself. Court physicians worked closely with tasters to document the precise sequence of symptoms associated with different classes of poison. Pupil dilation, skin color changes, perspiration patterns, and reflex responses were all cataloged and studied. Some courts maintained detailed medical journals that served as reference guides for identifying specific toxins based on the observable symptoms they produced. Primitive chemical detection methods. Long before the development of modern analytical chemistry, ancient poisoners and their opponents engaged in a constant arms race of chemical innovation. The use of precious metals as poison detectors represents one of humanity's earliest forays into applied chemistry, even if the underlying scientific principles weren't fully understood at the time. Silver, with its tendency to tarnish when exposed to sulfur compounds, became the gold standard for poison detection in many cultures. Silver spoons, cups, and plates weren't merely symbols of wealth and status. They were practical tools in the fight against assassination. When silver darkened or changed color upon contact with food or drink, it often indicated the presence of sulfur-based poisons, which were common due to their availability and effectiveness. The chemistry behind silver's detection capabilities extended beyond simple tarnishing. Certain organic compounds found in poisonous plants could cause silver to develop specific color patterns, from deep black streaks to rainbow-like oxidation patterns. Skilled court officials learned to interpret these color changes like a primitive form of chemical analysis, distinguishing between harmless tarnishing from age and exposure versus the distinctive patterns that indicated deliberate poisoning attempts. Gold, though less reactive than silver, served its own purpose in poison detection. Its interaction with mercury compounds made it valuable for detecting this particularly insidious class of toxins. Mercury poisoning was a favored method among sophisticated assassins because its symptoms could mimic natural illness. But gold's distinctive color changes when exposed to mercury compounds provided a reliable early warning system. Copper implements found their place in the detection arsenal as well, particularly for identifying alkaloid-based plant poisons. The green patina that copper develops when exposed to certain organic compounds could indicate the presence of deadly nightshade derivatives, hemlock extracts, or other botanical toxins that were readily available to would-be assassins. The development of color-based detection methods represented a significant advancement in protective capabilities. Court alchemists and early chemists developed elaborate testing protocols that involved adding specific substances to food and drink samples, then observing the resulting color changes. These tests, while primitive by modern standards, were remarkably effective at identifying many common classes of poison. One particularly sophisticated technique involved the use of indicator substances derived from various plants and minerals. Red cabbage extract, for instance, could reveal the presence of strong acids or bases, while certain flower petals would change color when exposed to specific alkaloids. These natural indicators were combined into complex testing procedures that could identify multiple classes of toxins simultaneously. The preparation and storage of testing materials became a specialized skill in itself. Court chemists maintained carefully controlled environments for their detection substances, understanding that exposure to light, heat, or moisture could compromise their effectiveness. Recipe books from this era read like a combination of cookbook and chemistry manual, with precise instructions for preparing and maintaining these crucial detection tools. Temperature-based detection methods also played an important role in early poison identification. Many toxic substances altered the normal thermal properties of food and drink in subtle but detectable ways. Experienced tasters learned to recognize when soup felt unexpectedly warm or cool on the tongue, when wine seemed to absorb heat differently than expected, or when the normal steaming patterns of hot food appeared altered. Advanced detection technologies of the late ancient period. As civilizations grew more sophisticated, so did their approaches to poison detection. The development of early optical instruments marked a significant leap forward in the ability to identify potential threats before they could cause harm. Primitive microscopes, while crude by modern standards, allowed court scientists to examine food samples at a level of detail previously impossible. These early microscopic examinations revealed a hidden world of contamination and adulteration. Trained observers could identify unusual crystalline structures that indicated the presence of mineral-based poisons, detect abnormal bacterial growths that suggested biological contamination, or spot the distinctive cellular damage patterns that certain plant toxins created in organic materials. The use of precision scales and measurement tools represented another significant advancement in detection capabilities. Ancient poisoners often relied on the assumption that their deadly additions would go unnoticed among the complex flavors and textures of elaborate royal feasts. However, the development of increasingly sensitive weighing instruments allowed investigators to detect even minute changes in the density and composition of food items. Court records describe elaborate weighing procedures where each component of a meal would be carefully measured before and after preparation, with any unexplained weight changes investigated thoroughly. This approach was particularly effective at detecting heavy metal contamination, as substances like lead and mercury significantly altered the weight-to-volume ratios of affected foods. Distillation techniques, borrowed from early alchemical practices, provided another powerful tool in the poison detection arsenal. By carefully heating and condensing vapors from suspect food samples, court chemists could concentrate and isolate potential toxins for more detailed examination. This process often revealed the presence of volatile organic compounds that would be difficult to detect through other means. The distillation process also allowed for the separation of complex mixtures into their component parts, making it possible to identify specific toxic substances even when they had been carefully mixed with other ingredients to mask their presence. Court alchemists developed increasingly sophisticated distillation apparatus, with multiple chambers and condensation stages that could produce remarkably pure samples for analysis. Crystallization techniques provided yet another approach to poison identification. Many toxic substances form distinctive crystal patterns when dissolved in specific solvents and allowed to evaporate under controlled conditions. Court chemists learned to recognize the unique geometric patterns produced by different classes of poison, creating detailed reference collections that served as identification guides. The development of systematic testing protocols represented perhaps the most significant advancement of this period. Rather than relying on ad hoc testing methods, courts began to establish standardized procedures for poison detection that could be consistently applied across different situations and by different personnel. These protocols included specific sequences of tests, predetermined waiting periods, and detailed documentation requirements that ensured nothing was overlooked. Training programs for detection specialists became increasingly sophisticated, with apprenticeship systems that could take years to complete. Master chemists passed down not only the technical knowledge required for effective poison detection, but also the subtle observational skills and intuitive understanding that separated truly expert practitioners from mere technicians. The integration of multiple detection methods into comprehensive screening systems marked the pinnacle of ancient poison detection technology. Rather than relying on a single approach, the most advanced courts employed layered systems that combined biological, chemical, and physical detection methods into overlapping networks of protection. These comprehensive systems included primary screening using animal subjects, secondary chemical testing using metal detectors and color indicators, tertiary analysis using microscopic examination and distillation techniques, and final confirmation through human tasting by trained professionals. This multi-layered approach dramatically reduced the likelihood that any poisoning attempt could succeed undetected. The documentation and analysis of detection results became increasingly sophisticated as well. Court records from this period show detailed logs of testing procedures, results, and outcomes that allowed for continuous refinement and improvement of detection methods. Patterns in assassination attempts were identified and analyzed, leading to the development of targeted countermeasures for specific types of threats. Communication systems for sharing detection intelligence between different courts and kingdoms began to emerge during this period. Information about new types of poisons, innovative detection methods, and successful countermeasures was carefully recorded and shared among allied kingdoms, creating early networks of cooperative security that prefigured modern intelligence sharing arrangements. The legacy of these ancient detection methods extends far beyond their historical significance. Many of the fundamental principles developed during this period form the foundation for modern analytical chemistry, forensic science, and food safety protocols. The systematic approach to observation, documentation, and analysis that characterized the most advanced ancient poison detection systems established methodological frameworks that continue to influence scientific investigation today. The human cost of developing these detection capabilities should not be overlooked. Countless individuals sacrifice their health and lives in the pursuit of ever more effective protection methods. Their dedication and sacrifice advanced human understanding of chemistry, biology, and medicine in ways that benefited far more than just the royal courts they served. Part 5. Common toxins and countermeasures. Throughout history, the relationship between poisoner and protector has been one of constant evolution, with each side developing increasingly sophisticated methods to outwit the other. Understanding the most common toxins used in assassination attempts, along with the countermeasures developed to combat them, provides crucial insight into this deadly game of chemical warfare that played out in royal courts across the ancient world. Plant-based toxins. The plant kingdom has always been humanity's most accessible source of deadly compounds, offering a vast pharmacy of natural toxins that could be harvested, prepared, and deployed with relative ease. Among these botanical assassins, aconitine stands as perhaps the most feared and respected. Derived from the aconite plant, commonly known as monkshood or wolfsbane, this alkaloid has been responsible for countless deaths throughout history. Aconitine's mechanism of action makes it particularly insidious. The compound interferes with sodium channels in nerve cells, causing a cascade of neurological effects that begin with tingling sensations and progress rapidly to complete muscular paralysis. The victim remains conscious throughout much of the process, aware of their impending doom but powerless to prevent it. Ancient Chinese texts describe aconitine poisoning as the death that speaks, referring to the victim's ability to describe their sensations even as their body shuts down around them. Recognition of aconitine poisoning required careful observation of a specific sequence of symptoms. The initial tingling, usually beginning in the extremities, would be followed by difficulty speaking and swallowing. Experienced tasters learned to recognize the characteristic electric sensation that aconitine produced on the tongue, a unique metallic buzzing that distinguished it from other plant toxins. The progression from initial symptoms to complete paralysis typically occurred within 30 to 60 minutes, providing a narrow but crucial window for intervention. Countermeasures against aconitine were limited, but not entirely ineffective. Immediate induced vomiting, if implemented within minutes of ingestion, could remove significant quantities of the toxin before absorption. More importantly, court physicians developed supportive care protocols that could sometimes sustain victims long enough for the poison to metabolize naturally. These treatments included manual respiratory support, cardiac stimulation techniques, and the administration of various herbal preparations believed to counteract the alkaloid's effects. Ricin, extracted from castor beans, represented another class of plant-based assassination tool. Unlike the rapid-acting aconitine, ricin was valued by assassins for its delayed onset and the difficulty of connecting symptoms to a specific poisoning event. The toxin works by inhibiting protein synthesis at the cellular level, causing widespread organ failure that could take days or even weeks to manifest fully. The delayed nature of ricin poisoning made it particularly challenging for food tasters to detect. Initial symptoms were often mild and nonspecific, resembling common digestive ailments or minor illnesses. By the time more serious symptoms appeared, the connection to a specific meal or event was often lost. This characteristic made ricin popular among assassins who needed to maintain plausible deniability or who wanted to create the appearance of natural death. Detection of ricin required sophisticated understanding of its unique properties. The toxin is remarkably stable and resistant to cooking temperatures, meaning that normal food preparation methods would not neutralize it. However, it does have a distinctive bitter taste that trained tasters could sometimes identify, particularly when present in significant quantities. More importantly, ricin produces characteristic cellular damage patterns that could be observed using the primitive microscopes available in advanced ancient courts. Cyanide compounds derived from various plant sources including bitter almonds, peach pits, and certain leaves occupied a special place in the poisoner's arsenal due to their rapid action and distinctive characteristics. Cyanide works by blocking cellular respiration, essentially suffocating cells from the inside, while the victim's lungs continue to function normally. This mechanism produces a characteristic bright red coloration in the victim's blood and tissues, a telltale sign that experienced court physicians learned to recognize. The smell of bitter almonds that often accompanies cyanide poisoning became one of the most reliable detection methods available to ancient investigators. Not all individuals can detect this characteristic odor, but those who could became invaluable members of poison detection teams. Training programs were developed to enhance this natural ability, with apprentice tasters exposed to minute quantities of cyanide compounds to develop their olfactory sensitivity. Speed was crucial in cyanide cases, as the toxin's rapid action left little time for intervention. However, several ancient remedies showed some effectiveness against cyanide poisoning. High doses of sugar, which could help restore cellular energy production, were commonly administered. More sophisticated treatments included the use of iron-rich compounds, which could sometimes bind to cyanide molecules and reduce their toxicity. Atropine, derived from deadly nightshade and related plants, produced a different but equally dangerous set of symptoms. This alkaloid blocks certain neurotransmitter receptors, causing hallucinations, delirium, elevated heart rate, and hyperthermia. Victims of atropine poisoning often appeared to be suffering from mental illness rather than toxic exposure, making it a favored choice for assassins who wanted to discredit their targets as well as eliminate them. The psychological symptoms of atropine poisoning made detection particularly challenging. Victims might rave about seeing things that weren't there, speak incoherently, or exhibit violent behavior that seemed to indicate madness rather than poisoning. However, experienced observers learned to distinguish between genuine mental illness and atropine-induced delirium by noting specific physical signs including severely dilated pupils, dry mouth and skin, and elevated body temperature. Treatment for atropine poisoning relied heavily on supportive care and time. The alkaloid eventually metabolizes naturally, but keeping the victim alive and preventing injury during the delirium phase required constant supervision and sometimes physical restraint. Cool baths to reduce hyperthermia, continuous hydration, and protection from self-injury were the primary interventions available to ancient physicians. Animal-derived toxins. While plant-based poisons were readily available and relatively easy to prepare, animal-derived toxins offered unique advantages that made them attractive to sophisticated assassins. These biological compounds often possessed extreme potency, requiring only minute quantities to achieve lethal effects, and many produced symptoms that could be mistaken for natural disease processes. Snake venoms represented the most diverse and potent category of animal-derived toxins. Different species produced venoms with dramatically different effects, allowing assassins to tailor their choice of poison to specific circumstances or desired outcomes. Neurotoxic venoms, such as those from cobras and mambas, caused paralysis and respiratory failure that could appear similar to various natural diseases. Hemotoxic venoms from vipers and similar species destroyed blood cells and damaged organs in ways that might be attributed to internal bleeding or organ failure. The extraction and preservation of snake venoms required considerable expertise and specialized equipment. Court records describe elaborate venom collection procedures involving trained handlers who could safely milk venomous snakes and preserve their secretions for later use. The potency of these preparations varied significantly depending on the species, the snake's health and diet, and the methods used for extraction and storage. Detection of snake venom poisoning relied primarily on recognizing characteristic symptom patterns and, when possible, identifying fang marks or injection sites. However, skilled assassins learned to introduce venoms through food or drink, eliminating the obvious signs of snakebite. In these cases, the specific constellation of symptoms became the primary diagnostic tool. Tetrodotoxin, derived from pufferfish and certain other marine animals, represented one of the most feared toxins in the ancient world. This compound blocks sodium channels in nerve cells, causing paralysis while leaving the victim fully conscious and aware. The psychological torture of tetrodotoxin poisoning, combined with its extreme potency, made it a weapon of choice for the most sophisticated assassins. The preparation of tetrodotoxin required intimate knowledge of fish anatomy and careful extraction techniques. The toxin is concentrated in specific organs, particularly the liver and ovaries, and improper preparation could result in the poisoner's own death. Ancient Japanese texts describe elaborate purification rituals and preparation methods that were closely guarded secrets passed down through generations of specialized practitioners. Recognition of tetrodotoxin poisoning was relatively straightforward for experienced observers, as the combination of complete paralysis with maintained consciousness was distinctive. However, the rapidity of onset and the minute quantities required for effect made prevention extremely difficult. Victims might consume a normal-appearing meal and collapse within minutes, with no warning signs or opportunity for intervention. Spider and scorpion venoms offered yet another category of animal-derived toxins, each with unique properties and effects. These compounds were often used in combination with other substances to create complex poisoning scenarios that would confuse investigators and mask the true cause of death. The diversity of arachnid venoms meant that symptoms could range from localized pain and swelling to systemic organ failure, depending on the specific species and preparation methods used. The collection and preparation of arachnid venoms required specialized knowledge and considerable courage. Ancient texts describe professional venom collectors who maintained colonies of dangerous spiders and scorpions, carefully harvesting their secretions using techniques that minimize the risk of accidental exposure. These specialists often served multiple courts, traveling between kingdoms with their deadly wares concealed in specially designed containers. Poison dart frog secretions, while geographically limited to certain tropical regions, represented some of the most potent natural toxins known to the ancient world. Compounds like batrachotoxin could cause death in extraordinarily small quantities, making them ideal for situations where the poison needed to be virtually undetectable. These toxins worked by permanently opening sodium channels in nerve cells, causing uncontrolled electrical activity that rapidly led to cardiac arrest. The extreme potency of amphibian toxins made their preparation and handling extraordinarily dangerous. Even minute skin contact could result in serious poisoning or death. Ancient texts describe elaborate safety protocols for handling these substances, including the use of specialized tools and protective equipment. The rarity and difficulty of obtaining these toxins meant they were typically reserved for the most important assassination targets. Heavy metals and chemical compounds. The category of metallic and mineral-based poisons occupied a unique position in the ancient assassin's arsenal, offering advantages that biological toxins could not match. These compounds were often stable over long periods, could be mixed into food and drink without significantly altering taste or appearance, and frequently produced symptoms that mimicked common diseases, making them ideal for situations requiring plausible deniability. Arsenic, justly known as the king of poisons, earned its fearsome reputation through centuries of successful assassinations. This metalloid element could be prepared in various forms, from the highly toxic arsenic trioxide to organic compounds that were even more deadly and harder to detect. Arsenic's popularity among poisoners stemmed from its unique combination of high toxicity, relative availability, and symptom profile that closely resembled common gastrointestinal ailments. The mechanism of arsenic poisoning involves the disruption of cellular energy production, causing widespread organ damage that develops over hours or days. Acute arsenic poisoning produces severe abdominal pain, vomiting, diarrhea, and dehydration that could easily be mistaken for food poisoning or infectious disease. Chronic arsenic exposure, achieved through repeated small doses, caused even more insidious symptoms including hair loss, skin lesions, and neurological damage that might be attributed to various natural conditions. Detection of arsenic poisoning required careful observation of specific symptom patterns and physical signs. The characteristic rice water appearance of diarrhea, combined with a metallic taste and garlicky odor on the breath, provided important diagnostic clues. More sophisticated detection methods included the Marsh test, an early chemical procedure that could identify arsenic residues in body tissues or food samples. Countermeasures against arsenic poisoning were limited, but not entirely ineffective. Immediate treatment focused on preventing further absorption through induced vomiting and the administration of activated charcoal or other binding agents. Traditional remedies included various herbal preparations believed to counteract arsenic's effects, some of which showed genuine therapeutic value in supporting the body's natural detoxification processes. Mercury, in its various chemical forms, represented another major category of metallic poison. Elemental mercury, while toxic, was less immediately dangerous than its organic compounds, which could be absorbed through the skin and cause severe neurological damage. Mercury poisoning was particularly insidious because symptoms often developed slowly and could be mistaken for mental illness or age-related decline. The preparation of mercury-based poisons required considerable chemical knowledge, as different forms of the metal had dramatically different toxicity profiles and routes of absorption. Mercuric chloride, known as corrosive sublimate, was particularly favored by assassins due to its high solubility and extreme toxicity. Even small quantities could cause severe kidney damage and death within days. Recognition of mercury poisoning relied on identifying characteristic neurological and physical symptoms. The tremors, personality changes, and cognitive decline associated with mercury exposure were distinctive enough to alert experienced observers, particularly when they appeared in otherwise healthy individuals. The characteristic Mad Hatter syndrome, caused by chronic mercury exposure, provided a clear diagnostic pattern for trained court physicians. Lead, while less acutely toxic than arsenic or mercury, offered assassins the advantage of extreme persistence and cumulative effect. Lead poisoning could be achieved through repeated exposure to small quantities over extended periods, making it ideal for long-term assassination plots that needed to appear entirely natural. The symptoms of chronic lead poisoning, including abdominal pain, cognitive decline, and behavioral changes, were easily attributed to other causes. The detection of lead poisoning was particularly challenging because symptoms developed slowly and could be attributed to various natural causes. However, certain physical signs, including the characteristic lead line that appeared on the gums and the distinctive pallor associated with lead-induced anemia, provided important diagnostic indicators for observant court physicians. Antimony, chemically similar to arsenic, produced comparable symptoms, but with some distinctive characteristics that made it attractive to sophisticated poisoners. Antimony compounds were often easier to obtain than arsenic and could be prepared in forms that were virtually tasteless and odorless. The symptoms of antimony poisoning closely resembled those of arsenic, making differential diagnosis extremely difficult without sophisticated analytical methods. The preparation and administration of antimony-based poisons required careful attention to dosage and timing, as the compound's effects were somewhat less predictable than those of arsenic. However, its relative availability and the difficulty of distinguishing antimony poisoning from other conditions made it a popular choice among court assassins throughout the ancient world. Countermeasures against heavy metal poisoning generally focused on preventing absorption and supporting the body's natural elimination processes. Traditional remedies included various herbal preparations that modern analysis has shown to contain compounds with genuine chelating properties, capable of binding to heavy metals and facilitating their excretion. However, the effectiveness of these treatments was limited, and survival often depended more on the quantity of poison consumed and the speed of intervention than on the specific remedies employed. The development of specific antidotes for different classes of poison represented one of the most significant advances in ancient toxicology. Court physicians and alchemists worked tirelessly to identify compounds that could counteract specific toxins, leading to the discovery of various universal antidotes and specific treatments that saved countless lives throughout history. Part 6. Impact and Legacy. The institution of royal food tasters and the sophisticated poison detection systems that developed around them left an indelible mark on human civilization that extends far beyond their immediate protective function. Their influence can be traced through the corridors of political power, the advancement of scientific knowledge, and the rich tapestry of cultural expression that continues to shape our understanding of loyalty, sacrifice, and the price of power. Influence on political history. The presence of food tasters in royal courts fundamentally altered the dynamics of political power and succession throughout the ancient world. Their existence created a complex web of trust and suspicion that influenced decision-making processes at the highest levels of government and shaped the very nature of rulership itself. Consider the case of the Roman Empire, where the fear of poisoning became so pervasive that it affected imperial policy and international relations. Emperor Claudius, whose own suspicious death highlighted the vulnerability of even the most protected rulers, had implemented extensive food tasting protocols that influenced not only what he ate but when and where he conducted state business. Formal banquets, once central to Roman diplomacy, became elaborate security operations where the choreography of protection often overshadowed the political substance of the gatherings. The psychological impact of constant vigilance against poisoning created a culture of paranoia that sometimes proved more damaging than actual assassination attempts. Rulers who lived in constant fear of their food began to withdraw from public life, limiting their interactions with subjects and foreign dignitaries in ways that undermined their effectiveness as leaders. The isolation imposed by security concerns often created the very instability that the protective measures were designed to prevent. Succession crises were frequently complicated by questions about the legitimacy of deaths that occurred despite the presence of food tasters. When Emperor Britannicus died suddenly at a family dinner, despite the presence of multiple tasters and extensive security protocols, the incident raised questions that contributed to political instability for generations. The failure of protective systems not only eliminated potential heirs, but also undermined confidence in the entire structure of imperial security. The economic costs of maintaining extensive poison detection systems placed significant burdens on royal treasuries that sometimes influenced broader policy decisions. The Byzantine Empire, at its height, employed hundreds of individuals in various capacities related to food security, from tasters and preparers to guards and investigators. The annual cost of these operations was equivalent to maintaining several military regiments, resources that might otherwise have been deployed for territorial expansion or infrastructure development. International diplomacy was profoundly affected by poison-related security concerns. State visits and diplomatic negotiations often became exercises in elaborate protocol designed to address security fears rather than facilitate communication. The exchange of gifts, traditionally an important element of diplomatic relations, became fraught with suspicion as each item required extensive testing and verification. Treaty negotiations sometimes broke down over disagreements about food and drink arrangements rather than substantive policy issues. The development of formal diplomatic immunity concepts can be traced partly to the need for protection against poisoning accusations. Ambassadors and their retinues required guarantees of safety that extended beyond mere physical protection to include assurances about the security of their food and drink. These early diplomatic protections evolved into the sophisticated international legal frameworks that govern diplomatic relations today. Marriage alliances between royal houses, crucial for maintaining political stability and preventing wars, were complicated by mutual suspicions about poisoning. Wedding feasts, which should have celebrated the union of dynasties, often became elaborate security operations where the symbolism of shared meals was undermined by visible testing procedures and protective protocols. Some political marriages failed to achieve their intended diplomatic purposes because the security arrangements reinforced rather than reduced mutual suspicion. The influence extended to the selection and training of royal heirs, as potential successors needed to understand not only statecraft and military leadership but also the complex security protocols necessary for survival. Royal education programs included instruction in recognizing poison symptoms, understanding the capabilities and limitations of protective systems, and managing the psychological pressures of living under constant threat. Regional variations in poison detection methods and protective protocols sometimes became factors in international relations, with different kingdoms developing distinctive approaches that reflected their unique threats and capabilities. Trade relationships were sometimes influenced by mutual assessments of each other's security sophistication, with more advanced systems serving as indicators of overall governmental competence and stability. Advancement of medical and scientific knowledge. The urgent need to detect and counteract poisons drove innovations in medicine and natural philosophy that laid important groundwork for modern scientific disciplines. The systematic study of toxic substances and their effects on human physiology represented one of humanity's earliest forays into rigorous experimental methodology, establishing principles of observation, documentation, and analysis that would prove fundamental to later scientific development. Court physicians responsible for managing poison detection systems became some of the ancient world's most skilled pharmacologists and toxicologists. Their detailed observations of dose-response relationships, symptom progression patterns, and treatment effectiveness created extensive bodies of medical knowledge that were far more sophisticated than is often appreciated. These practitioners developed systematic approaches to documenting case histories, comparing treatment outcomes, and refining therapeutic protocols based on accumulated experience. The study of plant-based toxins led to significant advances in botanical knowledge and the development of more sophisticated understanding of plant chemistry. Court botanists and physicians worked together to create detailed taxonomies of dangerous plants, documenting not only their toxic properties but also their seasonal variations, geographic distributions, and methods of preparation. This work laid important foundations for both pharmacology and systematic botany. The development of chemical testing methods for poison detection represented some of humanity's earliest applications of analytical chemistry. The procedures developed for testing food and drink samples required precise measurement, controlled conditions, and reproducible results. These early chemical analyses established methodological approaches that would prove fundamental to the later development of chemistry as a formal scientific discipline. Medical understanding of human physiology was significantly advanced through the systematic observation of poison effects. Court physicians developed detailed knowledge of circulatory, nervous, and digestive systems through their studies of how different toxins affected bodily functions. This practical understanding of human anatomy and physiology often exceeded the theoretical knowledge available through traditional medical texts. The need to train effective food tasters led to innovations in medical education and the development of more systematic approaches to teaching clinical observation skills. Training programs for poison detection specialists included extensive instruction in anatomy, physiology, and pathology that created a cadre of highly skilled medical practitioners. Many of these individuals went on to make significant contributions to medical knowledge in other areas. Surgical techniques were refined through the treatment of poisoning cases, particularly procedures for gastric lavage and other methods of removing toxins from the body. The urgency of poison cases drove innovations in emergency medicine that proved applicable to trauma care and other medical emergencies. These practical advances often preceded theoretical understanding by centuries. The systematic study of antidotes and therapeutic interventions led to significant advances in pharmaceutical knowledge. Court physicians experimented with various combinations of substances to develop more effective treatments, leading to the discovery of several important therapeutic principles. The concept of competitive inhibition, now fundamental to modern pharmacology, was first understood through practical experience with poison antidotes. Preservation and standardization of medicinal preparations became necessary for maintaining effective antidote supplies, leading to advances in pharmaceutical chemistry and quality control methods. The need for reliable, standardized preparations drove innovations in extraction, purification, and storage techniques that proved applicable to medicine more broadly. Documentation and communication of medical knowledge were advanced through the need to share information about poisons and their detection between different medical practitioners and different courts. This led to the development of more systematic medical literature and improved methods for preserving and transmitting complex technical knowledge. Cultural and literary legacy. The dramatic tensions inherent in the relationship between royal tasters and those they protected provided rich material for artistic and literary exploration that continues to influence cultural expression today. The themes of loyalty and betrayal, sacrifice and survival, trust and suspicion that characterize these relationships have resonated through centuries of creative work. Shakespeare's use of poisoning as a dramatic device in plays like Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet drew upon established cultural understanding of the role that food tasters and poison detection played in court life. The audience's familiarity with these protective systems added layers of meaning to dramatic situations involving suspected poisoning. The failure or absence of traditional protections served as powerful symbols of corruption, betrayal, or the breakdown of natural order. The development of detective fiction as a literary genre owes significant debt to the analytical approaches and systematic investigation methods that were first developed for poison detection in royal courts. Authors like Agatha Christie drew explicit connections between ancient poison detection methods and modern forensic investigation, using historical knowledge to add authenticity and depth to contemporary mystery narratives. Folk tales and oral traditions throughout many cultures include stories of clever servants who saved their masters through keen observation and brave action in the face of poisoning attempts. These narratives often emphasize themes of loyalty rewarded, wisdom triumphing over treachery, and the importance of vigilance in protecting the innocent. Such stories served important social functions in reinforcing cultural values about service, dedication, and moral courage. The archetype of the loyal retainer willing to sacrifice for their master, exemplified by the royal food taster, became a recurring character type in literature across many cultures. This figure appears in various forms throughout world literature, from ancient epics to modern novels, always embodying themes of selfless devotion and moral courage in the face of personal danger. Artistic representations of court life frequently included depictions of food-tasting ceremonies and poison detection rituals, helping to preserve visual records of these historical practices while also contributing to their romanticization in popular culture. Palace frescoes, illuminated manuscripts, and ceremonial objects often featured scenes of elaborate dining protocols that highlighted the dramatic tension between luxury and danger. The language of poison and protection entered common usage through metaphorical extensions that continue to influence how we speak about trust, betrayal, and protection in both personal and political contexts. Phrases like food for thought, testing the waters, and bitter pill to swallow all carry echoes of the careful evaluation and protective skepticism that characterize royal food tasting practices. Modern popular culture continues to draw upon the dramatic potential of poison and protection themes, with television series like Game of Thrones explicitly referencing historical food tasting practices while adapting them to contemporary storytelling needs. These modern interpretations often emphasize the psychological complexity and moral ambiguity that characterize historical poison detection systems. The ethical questions raised by the institution of food tasting, particularly the acceptability of requiring some individuals to risk their lives to protect others, continue to resonate in contemporary discussions about service, sacrifice, and social responsibility. These historical practices provide concrete examples for philosophical discussions about duty, loyalty, and the moral complexities of protective service. Educational and historical preservation efforts have been influenced by the dramatic appeal of food taster stories, making these historical practices effective vehicles for teaching broader lessons about ancient history, social structures, and human nature. Museums and historical sites often use reconstructed tasting ceremonies and poison detection demonstrations to engage visitors and make ancient history more accessible and memorable. The psychological complexity of individuals who chose to become food tasters has provided rich material for character studies and psychological analysis in both historical and fictional contexts. The motivations, fears, hopes, and coping mechanisms of these individuals offer insights into human nature under extreme circumstances that continue to fascinate writers, historians, and psychologists. Religious and philosophical traditions have incorporated the imagery and symbolism of food tasting into discussions about faith, trust, and divine protection. The act of consuming potentially dangerous substances in service of others has been interpreted as a form of secular martyrdom, while the testing and verification processes have been seen as metaphors for spiritual discernment and the evaluation of truth. Part 7. Conclusion and Modern Relevance. As we reach the conclusion of our exploration into the fascinating world of royal food tasters, it becomes clear that this ancient profession represents far more than a historical curiosity. The institution of poison detection and the brave individuals who dedicated their lives to protecting others offer profound insights into human nature, social organization, and the eternal struggle between power and vulnerability that continues to shape our world today. Summary of key insights. The evolution of food tasting as a profession demonstrates humanity's remarkable capacity for innovation in the face of existential threats. From the primitive methods employed in ancient Egypt to the sophisticated chemical and biological detection systems developed in medieval courts, we see a continuous process of adaptation and refinement that mirrors the broader development of human knowledge and technology. The individuals who served as food tasters embody a unique form of heroism that deserves recognition and remembrance. These men and women, often drawn from humble backgrounds, accepted extraordinary personal risk in service of others. Their daily acts of courage, performed without fanfare or recognition, represent some of the purest examples of selfless service in human history. They stood as living barriers between the powerful and those who would harm them, knowing that each meal might be their last. The technical innovations driven by the need for poison detection laid important groundwork for multiple modern scientific disciplines. The systematic observation methods, analytical techniques, and documentation practices developed by court physicians and poison detection specialists established methodological approaches that would prove fundamental to chemistry, medicine, forensic science, and toxicology. The urgent practical needs of protecting human life drove innovations that might not have emerged from purely theoretical study. The political and social implications of poison detection systems reveal important truths about the nature of power and governance. The constant threat of assassination and the elaborate measures required for protection shape the behavior of rulers in ways that often undermine their effectiveness as leaders. The isolation imposed by security concerns, the resources diverted from other purposes, and the atmosphere of suspicion that permeated court life all demonstrate how the fear of violence can be as destructive as violence itself. The cultural legacy of food tasters continues to influence how we think about loyalty, service, and sacrifice. The archetypal figure of the loyal retainer, willing to risk everything for their master, appears throughout world literature and continues to resonate in contemporary storytelling. These historical examples provide concrete illustrations of abstract moral principles about duty, courage, and the willingness to put others' welfare before one's own. Lessons for the modern world. The history of royal food tasters offers several important lessons that remain relevant in our contemporary context. The fundamental challenge of protecting important individuals from harm continues to exist, though the specific threats and protective methods have evolved significantly. Modern security professionals can learn from the systematic approaches, layered protection strategies, and continuous adaptation methods that characterize the most effective historical poison detection systems. The balance between security and accessibility that challenged ancient rulers remains a central dilemma for modern leaders. The need to remain connected to the people while maintaining personal safety requires careful consideration of the lessons learned from historical experience. The isolation that excessive security measures can impose continues to pose risks to effective leadership and democratic governance. The importance of systematic training, continuous education, and rigorous standards in protective services can be traced back to the professional development programs created for ancient food tasters. Modern security organizations benefit from understanding how historical practitioners developed expertise, maintained readiness, and adapted to changing threats. The ethical questions raised by asking individuals to accept personal risk in service of others remain relevant in contemporary discussions about military service, law enforcement, emergency response, and other protective professions. The historical example of food tasters provides concrete illustrations for philosophical discussions about duty, sacrifice, and the moral obligations that exist between those who serve and those who are served. The role of technology in enhancing protective capabilities, while potentially creating new vulnerabilities, reflects patterns that first appeared in ancient poison detection systems. The continuous arms race between protective and threatening technologies that characterize the development of poison detection methods prefigures contemporary challenges in cybersecurity, counterterrorism, and other modern security domains. Contemporary applications and connections. While the specific threat of poisoning has largely been replaced by other forms of danger in the modern world, the fundamental principles and approaches developed by royal food tasters continue to find application in various contemporary contexts. Food safety inspection systems, pharmaceutical quality control processes, and environmental monitoring programs all employ detection methods and systematic approaches that can be traced back to ancient poison detection practices. The concept of systematic risk assessment and layered protection strategies that characterize the most sophisticated ancient poison detection systems has found broad application in modern security, safety, and risk management practices. The multi-layered approach to protection, the importance of redundant systems, and the need for continuous monitoring and adaptation remain fundamental principles in contemporary protective operations. The psychological aspects of living under constant threat and maintaining effectiveness despite ongoing stress have relevance for understanding the challenges faced by modern security personnel, military service members, and emergency responders. The coping mechanisms, support systems, and professional development approaches that helped ancient food tasters maintain their effectiveness offer insights for contemporary human resource management in high-stress occupations. The importance of trust relationships between protectors and those they serve, highlighted by the intimate relationship between food tasters and their royal charges, remains relevant for understanding modern protective relationships. The factors that contributed to effective partnerships between historical tasters and rulers provide insights for contemporary security arrangements and protective service relationships. The systematic documentation and knowledge-sharing practices that developed around poison detection systems provide models for contemporary information management and professional development programs. The methods used to preserve, transmit, and apply specialized knowledge in ancient courts offer lessons for modern organizations dealing with complex technical information and specialized expertise. Final reflections. The story of royal food tasters ultimately transcends its historical context to illuminate enduring aspects of human nature and social organization. These individuals who willingly placed themselves between danger and those they served represent the best of human courage and dedication. Their legacy reminds us that throughout history, ordinary people have been capable of extraordinary service when called upon to protect others. The technical innovations and systematic approaches developed for poison detection demonstrate humanity's remarkable capacity for problem-solving when motivated by urgent necessity. The sophisticated methods developed by ancient practitioners often rival modern approaches in their ingenuity and effectiveness, reminding us that human intelligence and creativity are not limited to contemporary times. The political and cultural impact of food tasting systems reveals how protective measures can shape the very nature of power and leadership. The lessons learned from historical experience remain relevant for contemporary discussions about security, governance, and the relationship between leaders and those they serve. As we face new challenges and threats in our modern world, the example of royal food tasters reminds us of the importance of systematic preparation, continuous adaptation, and the willingness of individuals to serve others despite personal risk. Their dedication to protecting human life and their contributions to advancing human knowledge deserve our recognition and respect. The institution of royal food tasting may have largely disappeared from the modern world, but the principles it embodied, careful observation, systematic analysis, personal courage, and dedication to protecting others, remain as relevant today as they were centuries ago. In honoring the memory of these forgotten heroes, we also commit ourselves to upholding the values they represented and to continuing their legacy of service and protection in whatever forms the challenges of our own time may require. Their story reminds us that behind every great leader, every significant historical moment, and every advance in human knowledge, there often stand unnamed individuals whose courage and dedication made it all possible. The royal food tasters of history may not have achieved fame or recognition in their own time, but their contribution to human civilization deserves our lasting gratitude and remembrance. In closing, let us remember that the true measure of any protective system lies not in its technical sophistication or theoretical elegance, but in the human courage and dedication of those who operate it. The royal food tasters of history exemplified these qualities in their highest form, and their example continues to inspire all those who accept the responsibility of protecting others in service of the greater good.